Hello everyone, and today we're going to hear from people in the field on CAASM, Cyber Asset Attack Surface Management. What CAASM is all about, the benefits of such a tool across an enterprise or disparate estate, the gotchas, what to look out for in implementation, but more importantly, the complete visibility you get from such a technology. Today we're going to talk about something very interesting, reasonably new in the cybersecurity space, CAASM, Cyber Asset Attack Surface Management. And I'm delighted to be joined by two guests, Liz Morton and Matt Jopp. Liz is the field CISO at Axonious, one of our partners. Prior to joining Axonious, Liz spent nearly a decade in IT and cybersecurity teams across the Intercontinental Exchange and its subsidiaries, which include the New York Stock Exchange. So I'd say that was fun, Liz. We might delve into that later. And she's joined us today all the way from Georgia. So welcome, Liz.
Thank you so much.
And Matt serves as the cybersecurity architect for Coates. Who are Coates, I ask you say? Well, they're a global FTSE 250 in apparel, software and performance materials manufacturing with 80 plants across 50 countries. It's a global operation. Matt's he's got extensive hands-on experience across nearly every aspect of IT. So at Coates, he leads the design and management of a very robust security infrastructure and that safeguards the operations across all of those locations, as I say, 80 across 50 countries. So welcome and delighted to have you with us today.
Appreciate it.
So and Matt, you're in Croatia, you're in Georgia, and I'm here in Dublin. So it's a truly international community we have, an international call today.
Indeed.
Liz, can I start with yourself maybe? CAASM. I was on another call earlier today and CSMA was brought up and I'm like, here we go again. Cyber Asset Attack Surface Management. What does it all mean, Liz?
It's a mouthful. Well, CAASM refers to it's a tool type, it's a strategy, it's a category that Gartner has identified. Basically, it sounds a bit like attack surface management, but it's a little bit more. Generally speaking, CAASM tools such as Axonious will take the aggregate of all the metadata from all the tools that are out in your enterprise doing all the work that they're doing, EDR, endpoint management, vulnerability scanning, that kind of stuff, and bring it all together to provide a full picture of all your assets across all classes, right? Identity, cloud, on-prem, your endpoints for your end users. And generally, using that metadata, you're able to get a fulsome inventory that is actually true, largely due to things like the hygiene and correlation engines and tools like Axonious that will take tool outputs, like from, a tool like Tenable that will give you one picture of your assets. Your asset management system, SCCM, for instance, will give you another picture. Your EDR will tell you another picture about your asset. You bring it all together, you normalize that data. All of a sudden, you have a clear picture of what all of your assets are doing. And it's contextual because you're looking at your entire enterprise all at once.
So you mentioned like vulnerability, endpoint, and so on, and it's you get differing numbers. So when you say it normalizes it, what does it do? Talk to me about a little bit under the hood that
Sure.
Explain that to our listeners.
Yeah, just at a very high level, normalizing data allows your data to follow a common schema. And when your data is normalized, because your EDR tool has a data set that looks, follows X schema, and your SCCM, for instance, might have a different schema. Bringing it all into a common schema allows CAASM tool itself to output very reliable data, very easily accessible data. It also allows you to take your data set and using an API, because like tools like Axonious, we have a fully exposed API, to expose that data set to other tools as well. We have, for instance, an enforcement center that allows you to put actions to the data, right? So you have visibility, then you can action that data using something like our enforcement center, or you can turn it onto your SOAR tool. Regardless of how you intend to use your data, having it be in good shape, right? Not a bunch of duplicates. You have association between this MAC address is associated with this IP address, which is associated with this host name, for instance, it's on this network, et cetera. Like as your data becomes cleaner, your output, your outcomes become more reliable. So that's really why normalization matters so much.
Excellent. Okay. Yeah, that's good insight. Good insight. Thank you, Matt. And if I can turn to you, you've done it all. But what were the key challenges for your organization and what you were faced with at Coates to manage your attack surface?
Well, you can't have a security program without knowing what's out there, right? You can't protect what you're not aware of. So ideally, you want to be aware of everything that's out there. And you've got all these sort of disparate sources. You've got your EDR, you've got Active Directory, Security Service Edge, you name it. All of these are seeing your assets in one way or another. And it comes back to, honestly, that normalization that Liz was just speaking of, right? How do you condition all of this data to get it into some sort of meaningful single source of truth? Well, without a CAASM solution, it's fancy Excel ingest and, running, email.
Already see people, they're just going,
ripping reports off of emails, storing them somewhere. And then, Microsoft decides they want to change the amount of format of one of their reports. And then your whole mechanism comes crashing down.
Yeah.
So it's a manual, cumbersome process. And we just absolutely needed something that we weren't going to spend all our time massaging data into place, that it was ready for us to use.
And how do you ensure the accurate discovery and classification of all the assets in an organization? I mean, Liz was talking about that normalization. I mean, you're dealing with 80 plus locations in 50 different countries. Where do you start with that?
Well, honestly, it was, leaning fully on the CAASM solution itself, right? We get our sources pumped data into that solution, right? And it's going to sort of segment things like, here's your users, here's your systems, here's the software on those systems. And effectively, once everything's there, we do things like ensuring that naming conventions are followed. Right? Doing things that like primary data fields that we need for reporting or something else, that those are populated. And then we have, I guess, a set of conditional tagging that takes place as sources are pulled into the solution. And then based on all of that, we have an automated workflow that sits and helps keep all of that true. Right. And so it's really just establishing what it is we need to know of the assets and then using the CAASM solution to make sure that all of the work we're doing to clean it up isn't for naught.
Interesting. And Liz, I suppose it's sort of step back with you. You touched on a few tools. Like, how does it differ from traditional cybersecurity approaches, like, such as the vulnerability and asset management? Is it really, it's around the normalization? Is that the secret sauce?
Some of it, yeah. I would say the continuous nature of a CAASM tool is another real difference. If you run an ASM tool, it's going to give you a point in time picture of what your attack surface looks like. And unless you're going to run it continuously, which I would not recommend, as it tends to interfere with healthy operations, as well as outputting a whole bunch of data of questionable utility with CAASM, because CAASM is acting almost like a data warehouse for your asset data, right? And much like a data warehouse, it is the perfect place to pull all your data in and continuously sort of enact improvement, right? It's not an active system like an attack surface management tool. It's an active system purpose-built for vulnerability scanning. CAASM is kind of this standalone system. You aggregate metadata from tools that are out doing completely different things in the enterprise. You do that, you refresh that data as often as is practical. Not every tool is going to refresh at the same rate, and you really get to choose that. That's part of the secret sauce about CAASM too. Like, yes, there is the aggregation. Yes, there is the normalization. Yes, there is the hygiene of the data. But really the secret sauce is your ability to tune and optimize the tool to be reflective, as Matt referred to before, of what you care about, right? We're bringing all the data together. But if your organization, and Matt, I think this is a great use case I'm going to explore potentially with you after this, looking at your reporting hygiene too, like that's an interesting idea. Matt's org cares that their reports are fulsome, that they have all data fields in place. I love the monitoring for naming convention, because sometimes depending on how mature your automation is at your organization, people can get creative. That's not always smiled on, right? So the customizable nature, the continuous nature, and frankly, I think the offline nature as well of CAASM really sets it apart from any of the other tools that have been used to assess, security posture, attack surface, wellness, that kind of thing.
You say offline, the offline nature is, can you expand on that?
Well, the CAASM system is really a standalone system that is not doing anything other than housing the data that you need for managing your attack surface from the inside out. It doesn't have another job. It's not in line with active production. It really is there for you to use as you see fit to, power your automation, to power your reporting, to power collection for compliance activities, for instance. It is a dedicated source of truth. If you have an incident response team, for instance, if you have a SOC, if something pops up in a report, you have a place to go that is purpose built just to tell you about your assets. So that is different than most of the other tools out there.
That's a good segue kind of into my next one, is around prioritizing risk. So how does a CAASM help you prioritize that risk across, and I'll bring you in on this in a second, if I may, a really diverse environment.
Yeah.
How do you get to that golden nugget in terms of prioritizing the risk?
It takes a little bit of work. There is custom risk scoring in our tool as well. We have a tool coming out, or an enhancement to kind of our existing vulnerability management capabilities coming out later this year, called Exposures, where we will make that kind of even more automated, even more customizable.
The custom risk score is actually something we're looking to implement later.
Yes. So you'll love Exposures. It really is a thing.
In addition to what Liz was pointing out, for us personally, the conditional tagging that we do, right? We classify our critical assets in there, right? And so ultimately we can shift the perspective from just what vulnerabilities are out there to contextually what vulnerabilities are present on our critical systems and applications, right?
Right.
And so that really allows us to zero in on what we need to address first. So
yes. That, in combination with the ability to look at everything all at once, right? You are able to see very quickly where you have areas of non-adherence to policy. Some of our customers will use our custom tagging capability to tag by business unit. It becomes very easy to see if you have a business unit that perhaps is not adhering to the desired level of operational rigor, for instance. Going back to Matt's example, we've got a business unit out there that's just naming their servers whatever they want, as a minor example. Not so minor when you go to actually try and triage an event, for instance. So it's things like that allow CAASM to really help prioritize risk for practitioners and really any organization.
And from a shadow IT perspective, or undocumented assets, like how did you manage things during your deployment and maturing of the solution?
you use the past tense there. I don't think there's any past tense when it comes to shadow IT, right? But if anybody does have a perfect solution for that, I'd please do. Yeah. I would say right now, we're really just focused on awareness. We are looking to onboard an ACT solution, hopefully this year, depending on how budgets go, right? And this obviously is going to marry very nicely with our CAASM solution as well, right? But the idea is we've got a couple discovery solutions in our security stack currently. Those discovery solutions feed in to Axonious. So, each day I can see what systems might have popped up that aren't managed like all the other ones are, right? The CAASM solution, while telling you about all of these solutions, all of these assets that you have out there, it's also going to let you know the parity there. Like, okay, I see this asset and I know it's in Active Directory and it's got your, SSE client on it, but it doesn't have your endpoint protection on it, right? And so this is one of those things that allows us to say, well, how? Right? Was this just a miss when it was deployed? Or, did somebody just put the bare minimum to get it on the network, hence shadow IT, right? And so it helps us sort of identify at least the culprits that are frequent, right? Axonious sees it day to day or saw it for a few days last week, things of that nature. Again, because it takes these snapshots in time, and then you can look at what is happening in your system sort of from a bird's eye, sort of 10,000 foot level. Then again, once you get the next solution in there, now you're really getting a lot of really detailed asset information, at least, what switch it's, plugged into, what access point it was seen connected to, and then merge this to, again, this continuous battle for shadow IT.
So is it reasonably easy to match the users with the vulnerability in the assets?
I mean, the beauty of the CAASM solution is that you can cut the data however you want. Right? If I am interested in knowing, where are all, what's my heavy hitting CVEs that's out there, right? I can look at the data and then from that extrapolate down to which user and which workstations are impacted. Well, let's say that, I've got a VIP Alice, right, who's got a laptop, and I'm more interested in saying, well, what happens if she loses her laptop one day? Proactively, I can look and see, is BitLocker enabled? Is the endpoint protection there? All of these things that I can make sure that in the event that her solution or her laptop is lost, that the solutions are in place and we won't have to worry about a data breach. right? So again, this as from a relational standpoint, it just depends on how you want to look at the data and what it is you're trying to find out. Because everything's sort of connected, you can take any approach that you want.
Okay. And yeah, I suppose that's bringing in the risk. So you've identified the assets, you've identified what's on it. So I'm covered, from regulatory compliance requirements and so on. And that's another area, Liz, we touched on before from a policy compliance perspective. Obviously, in Europe, we have had NIS2 kick in earlier this year, and DORA was that only a couple of weeks ago? So we've got all of these regulations coming in, and you have obviously the same in the US and across other geos. How does CAASM help organizations with the compliance standards?
I would say the most, right off the top of my head, evidence collection can be made much, much easier. That can be one of the reasons why introducing new regulations rather, can kind of make people a little hot under the collar. It is the labor involved with evidence collection, evidence presentation, and then of course there is remediating any findings. What's nice about Axonious is if you have an existing relationship with an auditor, for instance, if you work for a highly regulated company and you're sitting down with your regulators on the regular, you get to know how your regulators want to receive evidentiary information, the format that you're going to submit them to. And what's nice is you can build that into Axonious. And when it's time to report, you can report. It's also great that you can manage your actual program to those compliance standards, which is really the goal, right? These guidelines, these regulations, they exist, right, to introduce a minimum standard into, in the case of DORA and the case of NIS2, into the European Union, a minimum standard for securing your organization. These are good things. And with a CAASM, you're looking at a less tedious, labor-intensive process when it comes to proving out your compliance with these standards. It also will help you manage your day-to-day operations to those standards much easier by doing things like Matt alluded to earlier, looking at gaps in your coverage. Is your EDR present? Is your EPP on each and every box it's expected to be on? And so on.
Matt, just jumping back to something you said earlier about you can cut the data whatever way you want it. Do I need to be a data analyst to do this, or is it kind of pretty intuitive?
No, the Axonious has actually made that part fairly easy as well. Hats off Liz, because working with their solution, they've offered a query language, right, that you can get deep into, and one actually even deeper than that, but I dare not tread there. And then they recently added a very basic kind of query system, but the entire time you can see sort of what's happening under the hood. We're not talking about any great, data manipulation here from the user standpoint. All the heavy lifting is usually done by your CAASM solution, regardless of which one it is. That's why they're there. If everyone was capable and everyone was a data analyst and all set and secured in these areas, these solutions wouldn't exist.
So it does all the lifting for you, the heavy lifting, as I say. And Liz, from a best practice perspective, in maintaining up-to-date cyber asset inventory, what are the best practices?
Well, I'm going to go and say something rather trite. Garbage in, garbage out, friends. It's no different now than it's ever been from day one in Computer 101 from back in the days when I was learning. So it's like anything.
Up there, you want to hear what you're referring to.
Right. No, it's a tool. It's a system just like any other system. Just like, we have CAASM checking out what's your coverage for your EDR. Why do we care about that? If your EDR isn't everywhere, you're not getting the most out of your EDR. And you're not going to get the most out of your CAASM if you don't maintain your integrations, right? So you're going to follow good, best practices from a security perspective. You're going to rotate your keys. You're going to have your credentials change passwords on the regular, all those things. But really what you're going to do is you're going to make sure that your data sources are the place where you spend your time, right? So you find that there's a problem in your deployment solution when you autopilot you're autopiloting your laptops is just an example. And there's a problem in that deployment solution in that it's not automatically installing, let's say, Umbrella. You don't go and fix that 5,200 times. You fix it once. And CAASM is sort of the conduit for your awareness, right? You can take action on your data on a continuous basis using a CAASM solution. That's true. But realistically, what CAASM should be doing is helping you improve overall from a resilience perspective. That is the end goal, right? That is the high point of your life as a CAASM customer, is reaching a point of true resilience because you've gone through and, care and fed your system, making sure your data sources are good, but you've also worked to improve the outcomes in those tools so that you're actually then getting the most you can get out of each of those tools individually. And in a perfect CAASM world, I guess that means that you just have a bunch of really nice looking graphs that look just like you're incredibly successful every day and you have nothing to do but sit around and drink a cup of coffee. I think that's the goal.
In the ideal world. Well, speaking of, in the perfect world and somebody who's done it and is doing it, continues to do it, I suppose, Matt, what are the steps you would recommend for organizations to integrate CAASM into their their overall cybersecurity strategy?
There's no one silver bullet. All right. For this, each company is going to be different. I can say what worked for us and I think would potentially resonate with others. When we really pitched the idea of onboarding a CAASM solution, we sold it as it's not a security tool. It's not just a security tool, right? It's a tool for the entire company. And, I wanted to make sure, honestly, this is our philosophy with all of our tooling, right? If I'm looking at an EDR solution, I'm looking at the other things that it brings to the table that don't just reside within the security department. Because if everyone can use the tooling, then everyone's going to be sort of bought in on the reason that the tooling's there, but maybe for different reasons. I would say, look to see where you can utilize the solution in other places. Right. I think it helps with the adoption. If other people are seeing are you seeing gains from this solution, then it's just going to drive it faster. So for instance, we are using our CAASM solution to enrich the CMDB of our ticketing system. Right? Notoriously bad, source of asset information because you've got technically a wide range of people potentially putting information into these systems. And so our CAASM solution is helping to make sure that not only is it populated, but it stays true, right? Because not only can we push information into that CMDB, we can pull it back out and highlight these deviations. Right. We obviously can supply the infrastructure operational teams with the detailed asset information, CPU type, how much memory, what kind of hard drive, this kind of information is all there. They can report on these kind of things from an asset standpoint, but from their perspective, not necessarily a security perspective. HR, the same deal. We feed in data from the employee database and then show that, well, hey, this manager field is empty, or, this email address isn't quite right. We're sitting there as a part of all of these other departments whilst also pushing our own needs through the solution.
So does that make it an easier tool to get budget for because it's got such broad appeal?
That's the idea, right? At least my approach is that, if I can show that this benefits more than just this team, right? We'll fight for our own budget, right? Because I still would like to own it at the end of the day. But if we can show that it's not only beneficial for us, but beneficial for everyone, not only it helps keep it around too, because the last thing you want to do is drop a solution and go through the entire onboarding process for a new solution, right? So the longer I can keep something around, the more I can build up around it, and the less likely that'll take place.
I would wholeheartedly agree, if I may add. When I was at CISO and was myself an Axonious customer before I became their field CISO, okay, the first thing I did when I got the green light for budget was I went to my friends over in the operations department and I was like, you guys, you're going to love this. And at first they were like, what? That doesn't make sense. And then I showed them the data, and it was really the quality of the data that got them interested, especially our asset management people. And it can be kind of a godsend for a number of stakeholders to have accurate, fulsome data about assets across all classes. As it turns out, everybody's been trying to solve this problem forever.
Yeah. And I would say one other option that sort of is helping us, we rely on the dashboarding inside of our CAASM solution for internal use, right? But that's not, I don't necessarily want leadership C-suite to be having to log into another solution just to see our dashboards, right? So we're actually using a CAASM solution to push data out into the Power BI environment, which is where all of their other reporting is already, right? And so now we're just another tab in that overall reporting structure. So you're not confined by just the boundaries of the CAASM solution, in this case, Axonious. You can tell the story wherever it needs to be told through its other existing API.
Matt, you're like my favorite Axonious customer. You just said tell the story. That's exactly what we're doing. We're actually helping you guys tell the story of whatever the story is for whichever stakeholder is actually at the controls with the data. That is such an effective way to describe your security posture, your operational health, your ROI on your tooling is if you can tell a story, and to be able to tell a story visually through dashboards. I mean, that's kind of the storytelling of the C-suite of the executive group.
The picture speaks 1,000 words, doesn't it? Matt, if I can jump into the risk side again a little bit, can you give us some tangible examples of how CAASM helped mitigate risk within your own environment, your own experience that you've had with it?
I would say a lot of it is proactive. I think, knock on wood, we've been a little lucky in as far as, what popped up in Axonious. Oh my God, let's take care of that, right? We're always ready for that sort of feedback from it. I would say it is risk avoidance, right? For us, we're an M&A company. And so the idea is that if we're looking at someone, unfortunately, security, I don't know, it varies when they come into the conversation about an acquisition, right? But let's say
After the fact.
well, I'm not saying that, right? I'm just saying that, I empathize for everyone out there. But let's say hypothetically, you're behind the ball, right? You've acquired a solution. You have no idea about their infrastructure. The CAASM solution, or in our case, again, Axonious, we can drop a gateway in and be able to pull the same information and see it all within our same context, right? But know that it's the infrastructure of this newly acquired entity. So immediately the asset information, the related vulnerability information it's all right there. So we know what we've just picked up. Right. And I would say that is obviously it can save you a lot of heartache, right? Because the moment that you bring a server over for whatever reason, if you're not rebuilding them from scratch, you're going to bring over whatever comes with it. The other area that I think really is beneficial as far as avoidance of risk is financial, and that is licensing. Right? We can look at our environment and see all the software that's installed on all of the systems that are out there. And through some querying through Axonious, we can say, well, here's all of the Adobes out there. Here's all of the Javas out there. Here's all of the whatever is typically a licensed product. We don't want any of that unless we know we've licensed and purchased it, right? We don't want it on our network. So we look to see if any of these things do pop up, and then can immediately remediate in the event that it does find its way onto the network. So that's a significant.
There's lots of food for thought there. I've got to go. Okay, I've got HR, I've got IT, traditional IT, if I may. I've got security. I've got our legal people involved. I've got so many different stakeholders potentially to engage with this, and I guess over a period of time, the conversation might start with IT. But then we're bringing in IT operations, or we're bringing in maybe a bit of HR or legal from the M&A side to help us. Because I guess ultimately from an M&A perspective, if you take a look at some organization you're acquiring and they're pretty poor on the cybersecurity side, well, that might drop 1 or 2% or 3 more in the buy price. Who knows? It's the impact it could have.
It depends on when you get to look, right?
Yeah.
That's always the trick. Yeah.
Well, as I kind of alluded to, it's often after the horse was bolted.
Yes, exactly.
So, Liz, talk to me about the kind of the future trends. What's shaping up for the future of CAASM? Yeah. And if I may throw in that AI piece.
Of course, we could not.
We didn't bring it in.
Talking about AI, let's talk about AI. Well, let's see. How about I take your first question first? What's next for CAASM? What's next? I think what's next for CAASM and AI, maybe are kind of a joint answer. Like everything else, growth. There's more asset classes. There's more sort of view of what our attack surface really is as an industry. It's cybersecurity professionals. What is our attack surface? Where does that end, right? I think a couple of years ago, we were talking about how remote workers changed our attack surface and spread it out into the world outside the four walls of the office. And now when we talk about the attack surface, I think, well, how about API? How about non-human identity, right? How about AI models? What about our databases? It is all about the data, ultimately, whether it's data to enumerate your assets and understand how they are contextually adding to or reducing the overall risk to your company from a cyber perspective, or whether you're looking at them from a risk of either audit from a top line tier 1 vendor or being overcharged. We have definitely seen that in our world with our customers, instances where customers had been sometimes significantly overcharged. We know that cyber is becoming more and more a business partner. So those small examples grow in aspect when you think about what's being asked of cybersecurity professionals, technical professionals in general. At this point, it's no longer kind of okay to just come up with a tool or a solution. We are expected to be in the driver's seat, talking about why we're spending money, what we're spending it on, looking to consolidate into kind of our magic quadrant vendor kind of stack, while at the same time having an eye for innovation. That's where we get into AI, and we start talking about AI as this thing that's going to solve all the problems and also be the cause of all the problems potentially. So I think that AI is part of this story, both from a how do we keep up with attackers that are AI enhanced, right? So how do we defend against the AI powered attacker? And also, how do we integrate AI to the greatest sort of advantage for us as, private sector, public sector entities, right? Both in the defense of the company and in that quest to kind of be the business partner that we're expected to be, right? I think AI right now is an excellent productivity enhancer, right? So I think we're going to see more tools adding AI into the mix to help us move faster as defenders, right? We've seen products from some of the top tier EDR vendors like SentinelOne and CrowdStrike. They're doing predictive AI for, attack kill chain, for, potential attack prediction, things like that. And like Purple AI, for instance, is SentinelOne's product. And those things are really good. They're meant to help us move faster. I don't think we're going to see AI thinking for itself and making defense decisions anytime soon. But I do think that we are going to see the attackers try and leverage capabilities like that much sooner, even if they aren't entirely successful. I think they are the ones who stand the most to gain from being able to have AI act autonomously. They have much less responsibility when it comes right down to it, so they can be far more experimental. So I think it's going to get weird, frankly, in the world of defense when it comes.
Or it gets better.
Or it gets better. But regardless, I think one of the ways that you defend against something that never needs to sleep, has no error rate when properly tuned, or near zero error rate, depending on the model. The only way I think you can defend against that is by not letting any of the easy stuff through. So then we get to this whole notion of proactive defense, cyber resilience, etc. And that brings us right back to the basics, which is exactly where CAASM sits. So a strong foundation in operational rigor, paying attention to the dotting of I's and crossing of T's. The best way to avoid a problem is to not have it, gentlemen. So, and that's my rather long-winded response, Colin.
Thank you, Lynn. Well, that dovetails nicely into, we're getting near the end of this from a CAASM initiative. So if I want to take it on, Matt, metrics should I be looking at to kind of for success? Okay. If I'm saying, right, I'm going to adopt this CAASM initiative, I want to track it. What should I be tracking to ensure those key metrics? What are the key metrics I should track?
Endpoint client parity, right? That every system has the clients that it should have, be that remote access, be that EDR, be that SSE, whatever, right? That, this needs to be on all of your systems typically. And if it isn't supposed to be on a system, the CAASM solution is there to help you explain why and to track why. Right. So not only can you, sort of track the overall landscape about, making sure that everything's there, but you can tag things that are a risk, but you've accepted that risk for whatever reason. I think vulnerability, your vulnerability count should be trending downward with a CAASM solution, assuming you've got cooperations with your operations and infrastructure teams for patching, right? That, you're going to be given information through the CAASM solution of this vulnerability is on this workstation. You have a very clear what takes place next. That workstation needs to be patched, or these workstations need to be, or this server needs to be patched, whatever. So as long as your infrastructure is supporting you in this, in the dialogue that you're giving them, you should see your overall vulnerabilities drop. Right? If your vulnerabilities are trending upward, your CAASM solution should be able to tell you why. Right? If overnight, suddenly, last week, let's say my boss says, hey, last week we had this many vulnerabilities. This week, suddenly it's skyrocketed. Why? Right? Well, the CAASM solution, I should be able to say, well, these new CVEs were talked about, were released, right? Or, hey, we finally got a new acquisition merged with the network, and this is just the junk, right, that came with it. All of these stories should be relatable and explainable through the CAASM solution, right? And I would say the other sort of, I guess, the other thing that would sort of show success is when the business is coming to you with asset related questions, right? If all of a sudden you've put all this work into your CAASM solution and you've done this cleanup and all of this fun stuff, and if you find that the business is coming to you to answer questions about assets, that's a really good sign that you're doing the right thing. So.
Excellent. Well, folks, we've come to the end. I cannot believe we've been on for 42 minutes nearly. Like, we could probably talk for another hour and 42. It's been great, and I think we should do it again. It's been really insightful. I've scribbled a load of notes here. The data slicing and dicing for me was really a salient point that you made, Matt. Risk. Liz, you touched on the whole compliance side, because that's really important. Being able to measure how are we performing against these regulatory requirements. It's so important. Not just in Ireland or the EU, but globally, it's so important. Matt, you hit on some quick wins, endpoint, the vulnerability count, all that good stuff. It's been great.
It's been great being here, Colin. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for taking time out as well. Really appreciate it. And for you, the listener, hope you've enjoyed it. Took a few nuggets away. We'll be back again very soon with another ThreatCast. Thank you for now. Goodbye.